So, well, my first question is, can you tell us something about your background and your research career?
Yeah, I studied English and German language and literature at the University of Heidelberg. When I finished my exams in German linguistics and literature, my future PhD supervisor asked me whether I would be interested in working in a research project with him. That was a research project on the unguided language acquisition of workers in Germany, Italian and Spanish workers in Germany. And then, after I had my final exams in English as well, he asked me whether I would be interested in accepting a fellowship of the Max Planck Society at a new project group for psycholinguistics in Nijmegen in the Netherlands. And I accepted that and did my PhD on the language variety of workers of my hometown. It was a Labovian sociolinguistic dialectological study, and I also did field research, and that became absolutely crucial for my career because when it was quite clear that I would finish my PhD in time, my PhD supervisor asked me whether I would be interested in a research project on radio communication on the Trobriand Islands with another Max Planck Institute, the Max Planck Institute for Behavioral Physiology and the Human Ethology Research Unit. And I said, why? And he said, well, there is someone who looks for a linguist who has field research experience, and he gave me the contacts. I visited my future boss, and after half an hour talk with him, I had my postdoc on research on the Trobriand Islands. In 1982, I did my promotion at the University of Frankfurt. In February and in July, I went for the first time to the Trobriand Islands. And ever since then, I've been researching the language, culture, and cognition of the Trobriand Islanders, first with that Max Planck Institute in Bavaria, and then I went back to my former Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics again, because there was a new group coming in on cognitive anthropology, and the director, Stephen Levinson, then hired me, and I started my research there again in 1991, and did that up till January this year, and then I retired.
What have been
and I must say, in between, I also did my habilitation, that is the qualification to become a professor first at the Technical University in Berlin, and then I moved universities and became extraordinary professor for general linguistics at the university in Cologne. But my main job was in Nijmegen. I just did besides my job in Nijmegen.
And what have been the main topics of research in the program?
Well, I tried to come up with a comprehensive documentation of language, culture, and cognition. When I came there, it was a completely undocumented language. There was no dictionary, there was no orthography, there was no grammar written, and I first wrote a grammar and a dictionary. And then I tried to document as deeply as possible and as completely as possible all kinds of aspects. First of all, with respect to ritual communication, and then later again with my work in Nijmegen again, I worked on the interface between language, culture, and cognition.
Tell us something about the lectures that you have been giving in Taiwan this week.
Yeah, well, I tried to represent aspects of my work exactly on that field, the interface between language, culture, and cognition, and the question of whether there is anything like linguistic relativity, and whether we find culture and language-specific features in different languages, or whether we also find universal features in different languages. And in order to illustrate that approach, I decided on 5 topics. The first topic has to do with the conception of a space and different ways in different languages and cultures on referring to space. And I showed that we could very clearly find out in a kind of semi-experimental setting that we can prove a really very, very strong interrelationship between language, culture, and cognition. So we can say that our research supports to a certain degree the weak version of the Worfian relativity hypothesis. The second talk was a talk in which I showed from a very clearly cognitive linguistic point of view how intricate speakers in the languages of the world have solved the problem of nominal reference. We have a number of different ways of systems of nominal reference, and these systems of nominal reference really open up an insight into the conceptualizations of how people perceive their world and how they try to express these perceived aspects of their world in language. And it was also a kind of typological research survey because I also showed these various forms of systems of nominal classification, and it also illustrated the idea that we have a very special form of thinking for speaking, and that was the emphasis of the second talk. In the third talk I showed how important it is sometimes to really be extremely methodologically critical with respect to what kind of elicitation tools you can use in order to collect data, and I illustrated that on the example of emotion research. There is a very strong American influence on emotion research by Ekman and Friesen, who claims that there are universal basic emotions that in all languages are described with exactly the same terms, with respect to meaning, of course. And on the basis of my own empirical work, I really could refute that hypothesis. It's simply wrong. It's not true. And I showed with a different methodological apparatus that was developed by Baron Cohen in Cambridge, that you get better results with respect to eliciting emotions and emotion descriptions if you use a kind of corpus of staged events by professional actors who really staged certain emotions, and people had to come up with a description of what they saw and whether this would express a specific emotion. So this showed the very psycholinguistic aspect of that kind of work as well, and expressed that. Within the same topic, namely within the topic of emotions, I presented yesterday a talk that was very much anthropologically, linguistically oriented. I presented my audience 4 observations I made in my first years of my first year of my field research on the Trobriand Islands in 1982-83, which were absolutely incomprehensible for me. I didn't know what was going on, and I showed that on the basis of a sound cultural knowledge and a kind of sound cultural background knowledge that also implies that you have to know what this kind of cultural idea represents cognitively, that you can easily explain what is so important in the cases I described to my audience. And it showed that one of the most important rules and norms on the Trobriand Islands with respect to emotions is that you have to control your emotions publicly. If you lose control, you lose your face. And you have to see in different situations how this rule and this norm finds its expression within the behavior of the people. And today I will say something about language ideologies, how people try to manipulate other people, and in this case it's young school children who get a kind of speech that is addressed to them in order to make them work very hard and then to redistribute everything they will gain in their future life to the village and to their relatives. It just shows how based on local, very culture-specific norms and conventions, the Trobriand Islanders react to challenges of globalization.
How have been your exchanges with the Taiwanese colleagues?
Well, they were absolutely fantastic. I had a very good discussions here with them. I had excellent questions by them. We felt on the spot on the same wavelength. and I was also invited to see some other things that were more on the kind of touristy side. I went with Professor Rick de Busser to Taitung, and in Taitung we met a man who was the child of a former chief there, and he was in his 60s. He had built a traditional house and a traditional surrounding of the house in the mountains somewhere near the place where Rick's wife comes from, and it was absolutely impressive to experience this man, because he gave such an idea of natural authority and respect. Was marvelous, really marvelous. And then I also saw the Museum of Prehistory, and on Wednesday I went with Professor Wen Yu to the Palace Museum, which impressed me very, very much, and showed how rich the culture and the history and the whole heritage of Taiwan is here for that island. And otherwise, I must say, also with the students, I found it extremely challenging and really very nice and interesting to interact with them and to get absolutely excellent and highly competent questions. It was a pleasure for me to be here.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I think that's all. Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.